I'm gonna try to keep it spoiler free cause even with all of its flaws, the story goes to some genuinely crazy places that you really need to experience for yourself if you haven't already. It picks up a couple of months after the events of Dead Space 2. Our boy Isaac Clarke isn't doing very well. And honestly, can you blame him? The man survived like 2 necromorph outbreaks, his mind's been repeatedly invaded by alien artifacts, and he's just deeply traumatized at this point. Now he's hiding out on a lunar colony on Earth's moon, living in this dingy little apartment, basically just waiting for the world to end. And to make matters worse, his relationship with Ellie Langford, the badass pilot from the second game who actually managed to keep him sane, has completely fallen apart. So he's just sitting around in a depressed corner when 2 EarthGov soldiers, Captain Robert Norton and Sergeant John Carver, literally kick his door down. They basically force him to come with them because Ellie has gone missing while searching for a way to stop the markers, and they need his expertise to find her. But before they can even pack a bag, the lunar colony comes under a terrorist attack led by a guy named Jacob Arthur Danik. Danik's the leader of this extremist unitologist group called The Circle, and he's a total fanatic. He blows up the marker test labs on the colony, which triggers another necromorph outbreak, and suddenly Isaac is right back in the running for his life.
Found a way in.
Good! You're looking for a cylinder, about half a meter long. Do you see it?
Ah!
The opening is actually pretty solid, and it sets up a narrative that's way bigger in scale than the previous games. So Isaac, Norton, and Carver manage to escape and trace Ellie's last known coordinates to a frozen planet called Tau Volantis. They eventually find Ellie along with her research team Austin Buckle and Jennifer Santos, and then the story shifts from a solo survival mission into this weird ensemble cast dynamic. And here's where I have to air one of my biggest grievances. For some inexplicable reason, the writers decided to inject a high school level love triangle into the plot. Ellie is now dating Captain Norton, and Norton spends half the game acting like an insecure ass toward Isaac. Like you'll be quite literally fighting hordes of mutants in the freezing cold, trying to save the entire human race from extinction, and these guys are bickering over who gets to hold Ellie's hand. It's so incredibly dumb and really drags down the tension in the middle acts of the game.
Everybody move! How the hell did Danik's men find us?
However, when the story focuses on the actual lore of the Dead Space universe, it gets incredibly good. Also, the game finally explains the origin of the markers and introduces Brethren moons. Up until this point, the markers were just these vague, scary monoliths. But now it's revealed that they're actually some sort of broadcasting beacons designed to trigger a galactic event called Convergence. Without giving too much away, you discover that Tau Volantis was once home to an ancient alien race known as Rosetta, and they literally froze their entire planet to stop a Brethren moon from forming. It turns the franchise from a haunted house in space into this existential cosmic horror story. You start to realize that humanity is basically just cattle waiting for the slaughter, and the scale of the threat is just terrifying. I absolutely love this lore expansion. And even though the interpersonal character drama was a bit annoying, the overarching plot was genuinely compelling and kept me hooked. Okay, moving on to visuals and the art style, because this was where the game really divided people. Because the first 2 games were defined by their dark and cramped corridors. Like you were always inside a spaceship or a ruined space station, and the lighting was pitch black and every single shadow felt like it was gonna kill you. But Dead Space 3 throws that out the window for the second half of the game, but the first half is actually pretty close to the OG aesthetic. When you first arrive at Tau Volantis, you don't actually go straight to the surface. First, like you gotta explore a 200-year-old fleet of spaceships orbiting the planet. The art direction here is classic Dead Space. The ships are rusted, falling apart, and dripping with gothic atmosphere. And those zero-gravity sections in the vacuum of space surrounded by floating debris and frozen corpses do look amazing. The sound design is incredible too. You pretty much only hear the muffled breathing of Isaac inside his helmet and the terrifying metallic groans of the ships. Visually, the game was a powerhouse in 2013, and honestly, even today at max settings, it still looks pretty good. The textures hold up, the lighting is fantastic, and the suit designs are some of the best in the entire series.
Isaac! Oh my god! He's alive?
That's great.
Ellie, it's so good to hear your voice.
How did you make it? The ship! We thought you were
I
dead!
followed a trail of flares. Are you guys all right?
But then, you take a shuttle down to the surface and everything changes. You go from the pitch black void of space to a blindingly bright, wide open ice planet. And you're suddenly dealing with blizzards and snowstorms. I feel like the devs were clearly taking inspiration from the movie The Thing and also games like Lost Planet. On a technical level it looks great, yes. The snow deformation, the ice cliffs, and the sheer scale of the abandoned alien underground cities are visually stunning. However, from a horror perspective, it completely ruins the vibe. It's really hard to be scared when you're standing in an open courtyard in broad daylight. You can see the enemies coming from a mile away, and even when you go inside these abandoned facilities, the art direction makes some very weird choices. Like for example, the ventilation shafts. In the older games, the vents were terrifying because they were dark and necromorphs could burst out of them at any second. But here, half the time the vents are brightly lit and it kinda telegraphs where the enemies are coming from. So like while the game is undeniably beautiful and features a lot of visual variety, the art style shift here definitely sacrifices that atmospheric dread that the series was originally known for. It looks more like an action movie than a horror film.
All right. I'm gonna find another nerve cluster.
Yes, good idea. That should boost the signal.
Alright, strap in, because now we're gonna talk about the gameplay mechanics, and man, this is where the game got dragged through the mud. Visceral Games was basically given a mandate by EA to make the game bigger, faster, and more action-packed to appeal to a wider audience. And you can really feel that mandate bleeding into every single aspect of the game. First off, let's talk about the combat loop. The core mechanic of the franchise, the enemy dismemberment, is still here. You still need to shoot the limbs off the necromorphs to kill them. You can't just go for headshots. But the problem is that the pacing has been completely cranked up to 11. Instead of fighting one or two terrifying mutants in a tight hallway, the game now constantly throws huge swarms of enemies at you in open arenas. And they're faster, more aggressive, and there are just way too many of them. It becomes so hectic and chaotic that you barely even have the time to carefully aim for the limbs. You just end up spraying bullets wildly into the crowd, which turns the combat into a very generic third-person shooter. It's playable, sure, and the shooting actually feels pretty punchy. But it completely lacks that methodical tension that defined the earlier games.
Do you see it?
And then there's the inclusion of human enemies. Because now this unitologist cult is hunting you, you spend a significant portion of the game getting into literal shootouts with guys holding assault rifles. And this feels so out of place in a Dead Space game. And to accommodate these gunfights, the devs added a very rudimentary cover system and a dodge roll. Yep, you heard me right. Isaac Clarke, an engineer wearing a clunky metal spacesuit weighing hundreds of pounds, is now combat rolling like he's in a Gears of War game or something. And the enemy AI is pretty bad too, so these encounters basically feel like annoying speed bumps rather than actual threats. Another change is the ammo economy. In the first two games you had different types of ammo for different weapons. Like if you wanted to use the line gun, you had to find line racks. This made you manage your inventory carefully and added that survival stress. But in Dead Space 3 they scrapped all of that and introduced universal ammo. Every single gun in the game uses the exact same generic ammo. I mean, like, what the f were they thinking? It completely destroys the resource management aspect of the game. You're basically just hoarding one type of generic bullet, turning the game into a lazy arcade shooter. But wait, before you write the gameplay off completely, we gotta look at the weapon crafting system. Because holy, this is where Dead Space 3 absolutely shines. Despite all my earlier complaints, the weapon crafting in this game is arguably one of the most robust systems ever. Honestly, it's so good I'm genuinely shocked more games haven't copied it. So instead of just finding pre-made guns and putting little power nodes into them to increase damage, Dead Space 3 lets you build custom weapons entirely from scratch. The whole currency system from the old game is gone. Instead, you scavenge these resources like tungsten, semiconductors, scrap metal, and somatic gel. When you get to a crafting bench, you start with a frame, which is the base of the gun. Then you slap an upper tool, which is your primary firing mechanism. Then you add an upper tip to modify how the gun fires. But here's the best part, you can also add a lower tool and a lower tip, which means you can literally combine two completely different weapons into one giant death machine. Do you want a sniper rifle that has an underslung rocket launcher? You can build that. Do you want an assault rifle that also shoots spinning blades? You can build that too. I spent hours just messing around in the crafting menu, coming up with some ridiculous and OP combinations imaginable. You can also save your custom creations as blueprints and instantly share them with your co-op buddy, assuming you have buddies to play with, which I don't, so yeah. Anyways, it's incredibly fun, but I feel like it's the final nail in the coffin for its survival horror identity. And before we move on, we gotta talk about the absolute clusterfuck that was the microtransaction controversy. Everyone lost their minds when EA announced that you could spend real-world money to buy resource packs for the crafting bench. You could literally pull out your credit card and buy tungsten, scrap metal, and rare weapon parts in a full-priced $60 single-player game. The backlash was biblical but kinda justified. But here's the truth, and hear me out, cause looking back at it in 2026, I feel like the microtransactions are pretty irrelevant. I played the entire game on hard difficulty, and the game gives you so many resources. If you just explore the levels, do the side missions, and use that scavenger drone you get, you'll have more tungsten and scrap metal than you know. You can build the most OP weapons in the game without ever spending a single cent. But having said all of this, did it suck that EA was pushing this model? Yes. Was it a dark omen for the future of gaming monetization? Absolutely. So, how long's the game? Well, there's a prologue and 19 chapters, plus a bunch of optional side missions. Like if you take your time, explore everything, and play some side missions, you're looking at around 15 to 20 hours to finish a single playthrough, which honestly is pretty decent. But the pacing definitely sags in the late game on that snowy planet when you're just doing endless fetch quests. And as for difficulty, the game is generally pretty manageable, mostly because you can build such overpowered weapons. Now we also have to talk about its DLC. Released about a month after the main game, it picks up immediately after the story ends. Isaac and Carver survive the climax and find themselves stranded, desperately trying to find a way back to Earth. And on a gameplay level, it's actually fantastic. They listened to the complaints about the base game being too action-heavy and cranked the horror back up. It also has some of the most gruesome content in the entire series. You fight against a cult of insane unitologists who have started mutilating themselves, the environments are super creepy, and the psychological tension is top-notch. It really does feel like the classic Dead Space experience.
You too will become one of us, a true believer.
So, looking back at Dead Space 3 today, how does it actually hold up? Well, it depends entirely on what you want out of it. If you're going into this game expecting some slow burn survival horror of the first two games, you're going to be profoundly disappointed. It abandons almost everything that made the series scary in favor of Michael Bay explosions, human shootouts, and endless waves of enemies, like it's a terrible horror game. However, if you can detach yourself from those expectations and accept the game for what it is, it's an incredibly fun, highly polished action game. It's a game that made a lot of really bad decisions, and it might be the black sheep of the Dead Space family, but it still has a lot of bite left in it.